Socrates, a turning point in Greek thought and his tragic fate. At a pivotal moment in the history of Greek thought, when philosophical consciousness had reached a certain stage, an extraordinary figure emerged in Athens, leaving an indelible mark. Socrates. Socrates was not a spontaneous anomaly, appearing out of nowhere. He was a child of his time, deeply connected to his historical and intellectual context. He became not only a central figure in the history of philosophy, perhaps the most fascinating in ancient times, but also a figure of global fame. Socrates represented a critical intellectual turning point where philosophical thought manifested in a new and profound way. Socrates in his philosophical context, transcendence and foundation. To grasp the depth of the Socratic revolution, one must first recall the philosophical landscape that preceded him. The early Ionian philosophers contemplated nature, but without reflection on thought itself. The Atomists transformed objective existence into abstract ideas and pure entities. Anaxagoras elevated thought to the status of a universal, all-powerful principle, a force that negated all existing reality. Then came Protagoras and the Sophists, who expressed thought as a real, dynamic existence, a fluctuating consciousness permeating everything, yet remained restless and unsettled, with the individual self becoming the measure of all things, albeit still subjective and contingent, not yet elevated to a reflective universality. Out of this confusion between dialectic and sophistry, where the objective gave way to the shifting subjective, Socrates arose, expressing true existence not as restless movement, but as the universal self, a stable consciousness free from sensory reality, individual desire, and speculative contemplation of nature that did not guarantee the certainty of self. Socrates adopted Anaxagoras' concept of thought as a universal self-determining power, but unlike Protagoras, he recognized in self-aware thought the serenity and security of existence. He defined its essence as the good in itself, existing for itself and in itself, and identified it with the true and the ultimate goal. Socrates' core principle: subjectivity, knowledge, and the good. At the heart of Socratic thought lies the idea that man must find truth and purpose within himself, through his own mind and consciousness. The good, as the essential goal, must be known by the individual self. Here lies the infinite subjectivity and freedom of self-consciousness that Socrates proclaimed. Truth is not an external given or an eternal law of unknown origin, as in Antigone's world, but is mediated through thought. Even spiritual concepts like God, goodness, and justice, though contents of feeling and intuition, become truly spiritual only through the mediation of thought. Unlike the instinctual feeling of animals, spirituality is rooted in thought. This emphasis on the role of the thinking self in establishing truth distinguishes Socrates from the Sophists, despite their shared focus on reflection and grounding judgments in consciousness. While sophistic subjectivity might dissolve into arbitrary will, the objective reality resulting from thought in Socratic and Platonic philosophy is self-subsisting, transcending partial interests and desires, and standing in authority over them. Turning consciousness inward is the moment of subjective freedom, but also a movement toward the spiritual universal that negates the arbitrariness of events. This unity of the subjective and the objective, of the self's thought and independent truth, characterizes the Socratic principle. Socratic ethics from natural to reflective. Socrates is regarded as the founder of ethics, as a distinct philosophical discipline separate from natural philosophy. His ethics were fundamentally subjective or reflective ethics, focusing on individual awareness and meaning, even as they aimed at the eternal, self-subsisting good. This differed from the objective or natural ethics, Sittlichkeit, that prevailed before him, where Athenians acted rationally and morally without specific reflective awareness, as if goodness were a natural law. Reflective ethics introduced the moment of consciousness and questioning, is this truly the good? While this consciousness was crucial, it carried the risk of pride and self-importance. However, Socrates primarily focused on identifying the good and linking subjectivity to it. Aristotle criticized Socrates for reducing virtues to mere knowledge or insight, episteme logos, neglecting the irrational elements of the soul, the passions, pathos and character, or habit, ethos, which are necessary for embodying virtue as personality and behavior, not just intellectual understanding. Virtue, therefore, is not merely knowledge of the good, but the entire human being, heart and mind, aligned with it. Socrates' life and character, the philosopher in action. Socrates' life was inseparable from his philosophy. Born in Athens in 469 BCE to a sculptor father and a midwife mother, he initially trained in sculpture, but soon became wholly devoted to the pursuit of knowledge. Drawing on the teachings of philosophers like Anaxagoras and Archelaus, and mentors like Protagoras, he became a deeply cultured man of his time. He did not withdraw from public life. On the contrary, he fulfilled his duties as an Athenian citizen, fighting bravely in 3 military campaigns during the Peloponnesian War, saving the lives of Alcibiades and Xenophon, and earning a reputation for extraordinary endurance and episodes of profound meditation resembling trance states. He held civil positions, showing steadfastness against the 30 tyrants and opposing unjust verdicts like the one against the generals at Arginusi. However, his true life's work was his constant engagement in Athens' public spaces, discussing moral philosophy with craftsmen, youths, elders, and statesmen alike. His philosophy was not a withdrawal from life, but a deep engagement with it. It did not form a closed system, but remained a living dialogue connected to everyday existence. Socrates' character was marked by unique nobility and multiple virtues: wisdom, moderation, justice, courage, and steadfastness. He shaped himself consciously, overcoming any unappealing physical traits, becoming an embodiment of a fully integrated plastic nature. Like a classical work of art, his indifference to wealth and moderation in drinking, as depicted in the Symposium, stemmed not from asceticism, but from a conscious control over the body. His dealings with others were characterized by justice, honesty, and refined Athenian courtesy, engaging others thoughtfully and respectfully, without arrogance, a spirit beautifully captured in Xenophon's and Plato's dialogues. The Socratic method, irony, and maeutics. Socrates' method merged seamlessly with his philosophy and life. It was not merely a technique, but a mode of dialogue and thought aimed at awakening consciousness to goodness and truth. It had 2 main aspects: irony. Socrates would often claim ignorance about topics his interlocutors took for granted, the famous Socratic irony, and through skillful questioning, lead them to expose the contradictions in their ideas and assumptions, ultimately guiding them to recognize their own ignorance. All I know is that I know nothing. The aim was not to embarrass, but to awaken a genuine search for true knowledge and realize that abstract concepts require definition and development. Unlike modern romantic irony, which often degenerates into contempt and self-exaltation, Socratic irony, even in its tragic form opposing conventional morality, was directed toward guiding people to true goodness and the universal idea. Maeutics, the art of midwifery. Inherited from his midwife mother, this method involved helping the soul give birth to the truths already latent within it by analysing the concrete to reach the universal contained within. Socrates did not provide ready-made knowledge, but helped his interlocutors discover it themselves through focused, rigorous dialogue. Although this process might seem tedious to those accustomed to abstract notions, it was essential for the mind's development from concrete to abstract and universal thinking. The immediate result was often surprise and perplexity, aporia, as interlocutors realized the complexity of concepts they had thought simple, pushing them into a serious quest for truth, recognizing that philosophy often begins with confusion and doubt. Goodness, virtue, and dialectic. Although the Socratic method often emphasized refutation, its positive content aimed at the good as the supreme truth and goal to be realized through awareness and knowledge. This good was not an abstract mind, but a universal that defines and realizes itself. Nevertheless, in Socrates' philosophy, this concept remained somewhat abstract and undeveloped. The tension between the positive and the negative appears in his approach to ethics. Xenophon presents Socrates as clearly teaching the good and linking justice to obedience to established laws. However, laws themselves are not absolute and may change. Dialogues like Euthydemus show how Socratic dialectic can reveal contradictions in accepted moral concepts, suggesting that partial rules become unreliable when faced with complex situations. This raises the problem of defining the good. Is it obedience to law, which can be inconsistent, or insight that discerns conditions and exceptions? Insight seems closer to the Socratic principle, but it remains undefined and subject to contingency, potentially undermining stable universal principles. Awareness of this complexity and the conflict of duties in real situations marks consistent moral consciousness, which understands duties not as fixed absolutes, but within the unity of individual judgment, what we call conscience. For Socrates, this individual, deciding spirit replaced the unconscious determination of natural morality. The daimonian, Socrates' inner voice. The distinctive form this deciding subjectivity took in Socrates was the daimonian, his inner voice. It was neither a guardian angel nor a full concept of conscience, but a kind of personal, divine sign, guiding him in particular practical matters, such as travel or conversing with certain people, and often associated with states of semi-consciousness. The daimonian represented a transitional stage between reliance on external oracles, common among Greeks when facing uncertainty, and full modern self-reliance, where decisions are based on reason and common sense. It embodied an early form, though still mysterious and individualistic, of making decisions based on the testimony of subconscious reason rather than external revelation, the trial of Socrates and his tragic fate. The daimonian was one of the main charges leading to Socrates' trial and ultimate fate. His trial was not an incidental event or a result of personal intrigues, but a historical necessity, arising from the inevitable clash between his new principle and Athens' established spirit. His contemporaries saw that by promoting internal judgment and questioning assumptions, he was undermining the moral and religious foundations of their state. The charges centered on two main points: disrespect for the gods of the state and introducing new divine powers. Socrates defended himself by asserting he participated in public rituals and that his daimonian was not fundamentally different from other forms of divine revelation. However, judges either distrusted him or envied him. More importantly, his personal, informal, inner revelation clashed with Athens' formal public religion, and thus introducing it was perceived as undermining the state religion intertwined with the law. Corrupting the youth, Socrates cited his life and the Delphic oracle's testimony as proof of his virtue, but the core of the charge was that he encouraged youth to follow him instead of their fathers, undermining sacred family bonds and planting seeds of discontent, thus destabilizing the moral fabric of Athenian society. The behaviours of his followers, like Alcibiades and Critias, also cast a shadow over him. From the perspective of law and the spirit of the Athenian state, these were real offences threatening the very foundations of the traditional moral and religious order. Condemnation and death. Socrates was convicted, and the death sentence was the direct result of his refusal to propose an alternative punishment, such as a fine or exile, which Athenian law permitted. He believed suggesting a penalty would amount to admitting guilt he did not feel. However, by refusing, he seemed to challenge the authority of the court and the people, contradicting his later acceptance of death in the name of law. He placed his individual conscience against the authority of the state, something no state could tolerate, since law and courts represent the collective recognised conscience. Although his moral independence was admirable, his refusal to acknowledge judicial authority led directly to his execution. Tragedy and legacy. Socrates died with courage and serenity, leaving behind a noble image immortalised by Plato. Although Plato's Phaedo presents a philosophical view of the soul's immortality, it did not offer true consolation by Homeric standards. His fate was tragic in the deepest philosophical sense, a clash between two divine rights and two good moral forces, the divine right of natural ethics and the spirit of the state, and the divine right of individual consciousness and freedom embodied by Socrates. It was Athens and Greece's tragedy, where one principle destroyed the other, both being just in their own way. The Athenians punished a principle that was already growing within them, which is why their later remorse and punishment of Socrates' accusers came as a recognition of his greatness. Socrates was the champion of a new world, and although individually defeated, his principle, subjectivity and inner reflection, endured and developed. While initially leading to the weakening of Athenian society and the retreat of philosophers from public life, it laid the foundation for the mind's journey towards self-knowledge and freedom. Thus, Socrates, who witnessed Athens at its peak and its decline, represents a major historical turning point. His principle of self-consciousness and inner determination, despite its initial disruptive effects, became the core content of all subsequent philosophical history and the essential foundation for the intellect's quest to know itself and achieve freedom.